We're teaching the Word of God to inspire and motivate. We're encouraging you to inquire and investigate as you seek after hope and salvation. We're using the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God, to cut through all pretense, prejudice, and preconceived ideas until we're left with nothing but the pure will of God. I'm your host, Chris Peltz, and this is Sowers with Swords. Back to Sowers with Swords. My name is Chris Peltz. I'm the evangelist working with the Southside Church of Christ here in Springfield, Missouri. And as always, Richard Dodson from the Kearney Church of Christ up in Kearney, Missouri. Rich, how you doing?
I'm doing good. I got a special shirt on this morning.
You do?
Oh, yeah. It's my Chiefs Super Bowl shirt. Up here in Kansas City, see, our football season didn't start till this time of year.
You're right.
So it's time for us to start gearing up, and we got to play our season now. And
right. You got to get past the AFC Championship before you get the Super Bowl, though.
Oh, we'll get past that. I can't remember who we're playing.
Buffalo
Chicken Wings, isn't that the team? But
oh man, we'll see how this goes next Tuesday when we talk.
Yeah, they got a chicken wing on the side of their helmet. But no, actually, it's kind of scary, Chris, because my son is as big a Packer fan. I don't really know how that happened, but he's as big a Packer fan as I am a Chiefs fan, probably bigger. I mean, he even has a cheese head.
Oh man!
And so if that happens to where both teams are in the Super Bowl, that's not going to be good.
Oh man, that'll be interesting. That'll be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing. You would think that your children would grow up to like the things you like and do the things that you do. And, they just don't. And that should be a show right there. How my son became a Packers fan. He even likes the Cardinals in baseball. I mean,
that's his mother's doing.
I understand that, but still, I mean, I always envision, my dad and I used to go to opening day for the Royals every year.
Yeah.
And, we enjoyed the Royals. We talked baseball. And so I always thought that's what I would do with my son. He has no interest at all in seeing the Royals.
Right.
So I lost out on that. I don't have that because he's a big Cardinal fan.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yep. Man, oh man.
I know.
That's interesting. It has nothing to do with what we're going to talk about today, but it's interesting.
Well, you asked me how things were going, so
yeah, I guess that's on your mind, isn't it? Yeah,
right. Go Chiefs.
Go Chiefs.
That's right.
Oh man.
I'll tell you what was funny, Chris. Last year, right after the AFC title game, well, after the Super Bowl, actually, but I was preaching around the Nashville area, and I was in brethren's houses, and they're feeding me, and all of a sudden it came to me. I saw somebody wearing a Titans shirt, and I thought, are you guys Titans fans? Yeah. And they're like, yeah, you're a Chiefs fan, aren't you?
Yeah, that's right.
No, this suddenly became very uncomfortable.
Right, yeah. Well, Jesus came to divide households, right? Father against son and son against father. Just not on the Super Bowl.
They took it in fun. I mean,
absolutely. Yeah.
That's what sports is. It's supposed to be fun.
Yeah, it's supposed to be. That's all it is. It's insignificant stuff. It doesn't really matter in the big scheme of things. But
as long as my team wins.
Oh boy. All right. Well, we're gonna have to talk about something else pretty quick. And actually, we're gonna talk about how the church makes money today, because this is something that I think is not only in the forefront of a lot of people's minds around us, because you've got churches doing all kinds of things. We talk about denominations and religious groups that are doing all kinds of things to make money. When it comes to, of course, many people don't even know that the Salvation Army is a religious group. And of course, they're out making money during the month of November and December with the bell ringers. You've got, churches that are putting in restaurants and other things. You've got churches that are holding car washes, bake sales, and all kinds of things to make money for that, for whatever it is, the work that they've got going on. And then, of course, you've got the televangelists who are famous for asking people to send them money, right? Send us more money. We need more money. Send us more money. Send us money and we'll send you this piece of cloth, this prayer cloth or whatever it is, right? But just keep sending your money. And then, I've heard of folks that would tell me of, in certain denominations where they would pass a basket around for the offering, and then the preacher would grab the basket and say, this isn't enough, and they'd send it back around, right? And and one preacher, someone both you and I know, would say, talk about either his mom or his grandmother, but she would have this roll of $1 bills because she knew that's what would happen. So she'd take off a couple of $1 bills and throw in there. And then, because she knew it was coming back around again, right? So she didn't want to just give everything at once, because then it comes around again. So it always looks like she's giving, every time that basket comes around. And the problem is that, and I've talked to a lot of folks that, churches are all just, I just want money. All they want is money. And that's one of probably the most uncomfortable subjects and topics for preachers today to really talk about, because you have visitors who've come in and here you are talking about the giving, talking about the offering, people giving during the first day of the week, and you're worried that in their mind they're thinking, oh, here we go again, another church just wanting a little bit more money. And so I thought we would talk about not only how the scriptures authorize a church making money, having, the contribution, but also our attitude towards giving and what it should be as well. Because just right up front, one thing that the church is not authorized to do is to go out and request money from the community and those around them, to have bake sales and yard sales, garage sale, whatever it is. That's not something the scriptures have authorized for churches to do. And it's dangerous, and it sets a dangerous precedent when a church begins to rely on the community to support them in the work that they have taken on to do. And especially when that community, those people are not members of that congregation, that really leaves a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth. And even those that don't know the Word of God, sometimes it just seems wrong, and it is wrong, as we'll look at in the scriptures today. So very quickly, Richard, we got, if there anybody that has questions, anything they want to bring up, any things that they want us to address on this topic or any other topic, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you can leave a question, comment, and we can look at that and certainly try to address that on the program. Be sure while you're there, subscribe, like. We'd love for you to share as well. Well, we certainly do appreciate the comments that folks leave. That's encouraging to us, and we love the interaction that we can have with those who tune in and listen. And so be sure and do that, and we do appreciate it. So, Richard, first of all, when it comes to the church making money, and I phrase it that way for a specific reason, because that's how a lot of people are looking at it. But when it comes to the church raising money, and having money, how specific are the scriptures when it comes to how that is to take place?
It's funny you should ask that, because many times we both have had conversations with others about what we do in our worship service, what the church does. And we both have made arguments from authority Uh, John 4:24, those who worship the Lord must worship in spirit and in truth. Colossians 3:17. Verses that are based on authority. I just happened in my studies. I don't even know how I missed this, but in Hebrews chapter 9, Hebrews is contrasting the old and the new covenant. And in Hebrews 9 and verse 1, and I just saw this, and I don't know why it didn't dawn on me, but it said that verily the first covenant had also ordinances of divine service. And I'm like, wait a minute. He's talking about the Old Testament. He's comparing it to the New Testament, and he's talking about ordinances of divine service. So he's making it very clear the Lord has rules.
Right.
And the Lord he's never not had rules for how man is to worship God. And when it comes to his church, and I say his church with Christ as the head, then we have to see if the Lord had anything to say about how the church makes money. Now, of course, you can ask anybody that question, and just about the only verse you can really think about is 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2. And on the first day of the week, the disciples came together and gave. And so that's the only verse that I know of that shows how the church made money. I'm sorry, I quoted that wrong. He says, upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store as God has prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come. That's the only verse that I know of, Chris, that shows how a collection is made in which a church made money. I don't see any passages that authorize a church to have a bake sale or to sell things on eBay or whatever, to have a carnival, car wash, whatever. I don't see anything that authorizes them to obtain money through those means. And you may think, well, what does it hurt? Well, okay. What did it hurt in the Old Testament? Well, if you go back to Nadab and Abihu, Leviticus chapter 10, they offered strange fire that the Lord did not command. And what happened to them? They were destroyed. There was rules. There was rules for their divine service. So how strict should we be, Chris? I mean, what are we supposed to learn from the Old Testament?
Right.
Is it worth risking your soul over? That's something else somebody has to ask. I would rather want to have biblical authority for, what the church does, what I do as an individual and what the church does, than to chance it.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a couple of things I want to address in 1 Corinthians 16, and then I'll actually show you a couple other passages that talks about the church actually obtaining funds and obtaining a means to help needy saints. But in 1 Corinthians 16, the one thing that is very specific that isn't found anywhere else, as far as the contribution is concerned, is when it happened. And he says, upon every first day of the week. Now, some have looked at this particular text and said, now this is only for a specific need at the time. There was something very specific happening. There was a famine in Jerusalem. They were gathering together funds to help needy saints in Jerusalem, and that was it. Well, that actually isn't the only thing that was going on. And even in the context, that isn't the only thing that they were using their funds for. If you continue the read going down through verse 7 and 12 and 14, just continuing all the way down, what you find is that not only were they, had he given orders of the churches of Galatia as well, that this was for the saints, right? The contribution for the saints. to take place every first day of the week, but also when Timothy would come, that they would also send him. In the idea and in the Greek, what is saying there is support him, provide him what is needed. And so when Timothy would come in this very same chapter, as after he tells them to take up this collection, he says that he'll come and he'll grab the money that is going to be going to the saints in Jerusalem, but Timothy may be coming through as well, and I want you to provide to him what is needed, and then send him on his way, right? And to send him on his way doesn't mean tell him to leave, right? It actually means give him what is needed for him to go about the rest of his journey. And then he goes on to say the same thing about himself when he comes, that they would also help him. And so there's a lot more than just a specific need in Jerusalem that's being dealt with in 1 Corinthians chapter 16. But the first thing to note is that it was a command given not just to the churches of Corinth, but the ones in Galatia as well. And it is a principle, and it guides us even today, that upon every first day of the week. And so that's one of the first things that I want to kind of point out in this particular text.
Hey, Chris.
Yes.
Now you keep saying every first day of the week. You might explain why you're interpreting it as every first day when the text says first day.
It says every first day.
No.
In that particular text. Now in Acts chapter 20 in verse 7, and maybe look at a different translation. Which translation do you have up?
King James says on the first day of the week. ESV says on the first day of the week. What version do you want up? But it didn't say every. Modern King James on the first of the Sabbath. I mean,
yeah, the plural. So, well, I mean, how often does it come around, right? The first day of the week. How often?
That's what they were to remember. In the Old Testament, they remembered the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Well, how often did the Sabbath day come around? And were they to just observe one at Sabbath day out of the year, or were they to observe every Sabbath day? And they observed every Sabbath day. And so that's why we say every first day. When we see something that says on the first day of the week, well, how many first days do we have? And so that's why that collection is every first day of the week, every Sunday, is because of what we learned up in the Sabbath.
Right. Yeah. Right. And so upon every first day of the week, right? I mean, the first day of the week comes around every week, and that's when they were going to do that. Just as when Paul in Acts chapter 20 arrived in Troas, he knew that the church was going to be meeting upon the first day of the week. So he waited. They waited 7 days, in fact, for the first day of the week, because he knew that upon every first day of the week, that's when they were going to be gathering together to break bread. That's something that they did. And so he knew that was going to take place. It didn't matter what week he would have gotten there. He knew that it was going to take place upon the first day of the week, which happens every single week. And so that's when they gathered together. Now, when you look at this collection taking place, there are other times when the church that talks about the church having means gathered together. Acts chapter 5, for example. If you'll remember, Ananias and Sapphira, when they were struck dead because of what they gave, but they came and they would lay their means at the apostles' feet. They would bring things to the apostles. So the church was obtaining funds. They were obtaining the means to provide for those that were in need there in Jerusalem, going back to Acts chapter 5. Barnabas was one that gave, sold great possessions and gave to the church. Ananias and Sapphira, had sold possession and give some to the church. Now, they went and lied about it. But then in Acts chapter 6, we see that there was a daily distribution, that there were those saints who were in need, and they would come and they were being provided for by the means that the church had gathered together when the saints had given of their means. And so there was a distribution that was taking place to the widows, for example, there in Acts chapter 6. And so we see that the church had means, but but the question is, how did they obtain it? And that was through these free will offerings. Even going back to 1 Corinthians 16, as each one of you, have determined, lay by and store. It's a determination that you make, that you determine what you're going to give. But one thing that's consistent when you look at not only Acts, but 1 Corinthians 16, and then we can get into 2 Corinthians chapter 8, 2 Corinthians chapter 9, the thing that is consistent in all of this is free will offerings. They weren't buying a service. They were not, selling things, but rather there were saints who were giving as they determined within themselves to give a free will offering to the local church.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's let's see. Trying to remember, there was this offering. It's a there's more to our giving than just giving of our abundance as well. I was just thinking about the Macedonians.
2 Corinthians 8. Yep.
Yeah, how they gave. There was a great trial of affliction in verse 2. And the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded into the riches of their liberality. And he said that they were willing of themselves beyond their power to give. So that means they were given even beyond what they even had to give. So, yeah, there's, and of course, you think about that, the old widow woman, the old,
yeah, the widow in the temple when Jesus was watching, from afar, seeing what she was going to give, and she put in 2 mites. And Jesus made it a point with the disciples saying, look at what she did. Right? You've got all these other people coming in and giving, what would seem like an abundance of money, right? But they were giving, then the point Jesus is making, they were giving out of their abundance, right? Not out of their necessity. They weren't making, a sacrifice to give, but here she gave all that she had. She gave her last 2 bits into the temple treasury. And Jesus says she gave more than everyone else who gave, even though it was just these 2 little bits. This was more because it was out of necessity. It was out of sacrifice that she did that, not out of her abundance.
Yeah. I was trying to remember where that passage was. I couldn't remember it off the top of my head, but yeah,
you think about how that's even possible, and why Jesus would make that statement. And there's really 2 things I want to say about that, because when you go back to 2 Corinthians chapter 8, one of the things that it says is that they gave themselves first to the Lord. Yes. Right. And so that's one of the first keys, is giving yourself to the Lord, recognizing that everything we have is from God, being content with what we have, and not, trying to, keep up with the Joneses, as the expression goes. But also, when you think about this occasion, here's Jesus, making this point with this widow. And what strikes me is the fact that Jesus is paying attention to what was being given. And I think that ought to strike every one of us in our hearts, that ought to really, hit home, because we think about what we give and we make a determination of what we're going to give on the first day of the week. It matters to Jesus. He's paying attention, and he's watching, and he's seeing, how we're making that determination, and how it is we're giving, and what it is we're giving. And he's watching, and he's paying attention to that because he cares. It does matter to him, how this is going about. And that's why he makes the point to the disciples as well. It's not always about who gives the most, especially when it's just out of our abundance, but it's about the heart of those who are giving. But the biggest point is the fact that Jesus is watching.
Mark 12, starting in verse 41, Jesus sat over against the treasury And behold, how the people cast money into the treasury, and many that were rich cast in much. And there was a certain poor widow, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. And he called unto him his disciples, and saith unto them, Verily I say unto you, that this poor widow has cast more in than all which have cast in the treasury. For all that they did cast in their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living. And you mentioned Barnabas, I believe it was in Acts 4, about he had land and he sold it and laid it at the apostles' feet. I don't know what else Barnabas had, but as far as everything that came with the land, he gave all of that. But at that time, now of course those were special circumstances.
There were.
They needed, everybody needed to learn the truth. And so that's why they were there in Jerusalem. I'm sure they'd planned to go home, but they heard the truth from the apostles and they needed to learn. And so they probably didn't plan on staying that long. But they were still, I mean, Chris, there was probably rich people, rich Christians who were willing to make themselves poor to be, like their brethren. In other words, some brethren might have been like this poor widow woman. They may have given all that they had, and it might only have been a few mites. But then there'd be rich people who were willing to give in much more, and they didn't see it as a problem to make themselves poor for their brethren. They didn't see that as a problem. And that really reflects, what they had given up. They saw that they were gaining so much more by being a Christian that they didn't want to covet their money.
Yeah, that's right. And so the biggest thing that I want to, point out is that this was something that Christians were doing as a responsibility and definitely a command. And one thing that I hear a lot when I visit, and it's something that is even said here where I'm at in Springfield, when we gather together on the first day of the week, and we talk about the offering, right? So we have the Lord's Supper, and then we have the other act of worship, which is the offering. And when we gather that collection, a few words will be said generally before that. And something that is often stated is that, this is not a request of funds of our visitors. This is something that we as a congregation, are doing in fulfillment of the command from 1 Corinthians 16 and other texts, that this is what we're doing. And it's a responsibility and obligation that we have as members of this congregation to fulfill. And that certainly is true. Because we're not to rely upon the world to do the Lord's work, right? This is something that we do as God's children to fulfill the work that God has given the local church to do. We shouldn't be dependent upon the world in order to do the work God has given us to do. He wants us to be self-sufficient in that respect. He wants us to be able to accomplish those things through our means. And he's blessed us enough to accomplish those things. And so what happens is the world doesn't, or, denominationalism, they don't rely upon the Lord in a lot of ways. But when it comes to these churches that are beginning to have these bake sales, they're taking on work and they're taking on different, aspects of things that, first of all, they can't afford, which there's a principle in Scripture even there, right? Not going beyond our means and being content. But we get this worldly carnal attitude that we want to do bigger and better. We want to have things, with this wow factor kind of thing to it, or do it better than everyone else, bigger than everyone else. And so we want to take on this work that we cannot afford, and then we have to go and beg for money. And we're begging for money from those of the world. We're asking people that have nothing to do with that work to give so that we can do a work that we've decided to take on that we can't afford ourselves. And that's, churches get themselves in a lot of trouble, and it puts a bad taste in in the neighborhood, in society, in those around when it comes to just looking at churches as a whole. And it hurts the work that the Lord's church is trying to do ultimately.
Well, Chris, I have a question for you. And this is something I have pondered. In 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verse 7, it says, every man according as he is purposed in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loves a cheerful giver. Okay, so that's how we're supposed to give. We're supposed to think it out before we give. We purpose in our heart. We don't give grudgingly, but then it says, or of necessity. In other words, it's not a forced giving. Isn't that right?
That's right.
What would you think about churches that start projects? Maybe they're going to build a bigger building or an add-on or whatever, and they tell their members they're going to have to give more. Is that putting a temptation in front of the members to give of necessity?
That compulsion or of necessity, feeling that they have to in order to be right with God, I think it shows the wrong heart, the wrong attitude, and that can be a danger. What you've described, I think, can be a danger. Here's one of the what I want to be careful with, because when a congregation takes on certain responsibilities, such as a building, such as possessions, churches own certain things in order to carry out the work that they have. That is a responsibility, for the church to be good stewards of those things and to maintain that work. And so there is some necessity in that respect. But I think that the point really is going beyond really what they're even capable of, or saying that they have to, compelling someone to do something, or feel as though they have to.
They might be giving grudgingly. You're putting temptation in front of them.
I think it goes together in a lot of ways, and that's the problem. I mean, we can give, but then if we're giving in a mindset that but I really don't want to, that grudgingly in that respect, even if the church can benefit from what you're giving, you don't, and we need to understand that we should be benefiting from what we give. He who sows bountifully reaps bountifully, as he points out. Not a health and wealth type doctrine, but sometimes reaping the benefits of that is a spiritual blessing that we receive, and it's something that we should do not only willingly, but with great joy. And desiring to help and to do what we can so that the church can accomplish the work that God has given it to do. But when our heart is wrong, then we're looking at, what am I going to miss out in this world? What possessions am I going to miss out if I give a little bit more? And that's where it becomes grudgingly.
Well, that's something I have seen practiced by various churches through the years, and I've always wondered about that. If that's something that we should be asking our members to give more because we have a certain thing we are wanting to accomplish. That was just something I wanted to ask you, Chris.
I think it's presumptuous, first of all, for a church to first of all just go ahead and take on a work that they can't already afford. I think that's a bad practice. Now, to say this is something we'd like to do, and if we can have the funds to do it, we will. And so give someone something to think about, and if they want to and feel that they can and willingly and joyfully give more, and the church is able to accomplish those things, that's one aspect of it. But the problem is, a lot of times, in fact, we received a letter here at Southside, and this blew my mind. I couldn't believe the gall of the church in another state to send us a letter and say, you know what, we still owe we built this building, we still owe on this building, we've been paying for it. But we've decided we're going to use our funds for this other means. They've come up with another work that they're going to use their money for. And so they've sent letter to all these churches asking them to pledge to pay for their building so that they can use their money for this other work that they've taken on. It blew my mind that the gall that they actually sent out this letter saying, hey, we don't want to pay for our own building anymore. We want you to pay for it. And then we're going to take the money that, that our congregation is giving on the first day of the week, and we're going to do something else with it. But, that kind of puts us in a bad spot. So why don't you pay for our building so that we can do all this other work? I'm like, well, wait a minute. First, you guys took that responsibility on. How dare you, ask us now to take it and almost, word it in such a way as it, we should be considering taking on this work. What about the work we've got going on? What about the things we're doing? In our responsibilities? I couldn't believe the gall of this congregation to send out a letter and request the funds to pay for something because they've decided they don't want to pay for it anymore. That they want to do other things, rather than being patient, rather than being content and fulfill the responsibility that they took on to begin with. They just want to pass it on to someone else. And really it goes to the entitlement society that we live in altogether. And so Christians have to be very careful about that.
Something else they need to be careful about is making sure they pay the preacher, because there are churches that cannot fully fund their preacher. And I have seen this, I've experienced this, where preachers working at a church has to draw outside support, and where the church where they're at cannot fully fund them. And then the church where they're at, and if they have a surplus of money, instead of trying to relieve those brethren who are supporting their preacher, they will go ahead and give money to a needy saint in another location. And I've always questioned that as well, as if that's something that they should be doing, if they should be working toward, paying for the work that they're already engaged in.
Yeah. One of the biggest problems in marriage, you know what it is, Richard?
Oh, you would know, right?
Yeah. Yeah, right.
No, there's no problems here, Chris. I can show you.
One of the biggest problems in relationships, in marriage, is money, right? I know communication, right? It's right up there, but money. People fight over money all the time, and how to spend, what to spend it on, what not to spend. And that's true in churches as well. This gets into a lot of issues. It creates problems in congregations all around the world. Money, which is why I think Paul, by inspiration of King Jesus, warns about the love of money is the root of all evil, and in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. And that is so true. And that is seen bore out in not only in homes, in marriages, in families. It is seen bore out in the church as well. And we've got to be very careful about it. What we need to do is we need to make sure that we are putting God first, that we give ourselves first to the Lord, as they did, 2 Corinthians chapter 8, and that we do what we can to help the local congregations that we're a part of to give and do the work that God has given us to do. Be good stewards of not only his grace, but everything that he has blessed us with, because all things come from the Lord. And so that's what we need to make sure that we do first and foremost. Churches shouldn't be having bake sales. There's no need for that. If the congregations, if the members of the church are doing what they're supposed to do, and the church isn't taking on more than they should be taking on in the authorized work that they've been given, then they should be able to just simply do what God says and have a free will offering upon every first day of the week. Last thoughts, Richard?
Nah, I'm spoke out.
You're spoke out.
I'll say it again. Go Chiefs.
Go Chiefs. Oh man. All right. Well, folks, we appreciate you listening and tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe and share our Facebook, share the YouTube channel as well. We really do appreciate it. And we appreciate the comments also. And until next time, remember to grab the sword of the Spirit, which is the Word of God.
Thank you for watching Sowers with Swords, a work of Southside Church of Christ which meets at 1517 East Cherokee Street in Springfield, Missouri. Visit our website for more information, southsidesower.com, or email us at southsidesower@gmail.com.